This is an oral history interview with Miss Lois Lilly in her home on February 28, 1983. The interviewer is Susan Gordon. Miss Lilly, where was your father born and what was his name?
He was born near Weldon, and his name was Franklin E. He always went by Frankie Lilly.
And your mother?
My mother was Anna B. Secker, and she was born near Whiteheath.
What type of work did your father do?
He was a farmer.
How large a farm did you have?
Oh, he farmed 400 to 500 acres. Farmed one of the Tapman farms.
And that was located near Weldon?
No, that was located here, just across the river. And his father before him farmed Tapman land.
Did he have hired men to help him?
Oh yes, we had hired men all the time. In the main, getting the crops in and harvesting and so forth, there was always 2 or 3 around our table. And well, in corn husking time, it would be 5 or 6.
Did your mother cook for all of them?
My mother cooked for all of them, and we had to wash for them.
Did they live with you then?
Oh yes, they lived with us. We had a kind of a bunkhouse that they slept in, and of course we had entire care of that and all the bedding and everything. Usually during the winter time, you see, these hired men a lot of them went back to Kentucky. A lot of them were what we call laid off. They went to their family or something or other. But we usually had one all winter long, and they were just right in with your family all the time.
Did you keep any one for a particular long period of
Yes,
time?
we had one in particular, Avery Abbott, was with us for 8 years. And before that we had Tom Clark. He was a native of Monticello. He was a brother to Minnie Clark. And Tom was with us for a long, long time. Then before that, when I was just a youngster, we had Mike Clodfelter. Mike Clodfelter is the great-grandfather of all of them here. But we did have a little house that he and Mrs. Clodfelter lived in, and they were just a joy to us. Mike couldn't read nor write, but that was all right. We youngsters would run across the cornfield and visit over there as much as we possibly could.
How much schooling did your parents have?
My father, I'm not sure. You see, they went to the rural schools. I suppose he went to the end of the rural school, and then he went to a business college in St. Louis until the family got the measles, and then they called him home. So he didn't get to go too long. My mother was a teacher here in Piatt County, and you would go to the rural school through the 10th grade. Everything was taught through the 10th grade. And then, if there was no place for you to go to school, you went back and took the 9th and 10th over, and the 9th and 10th over. And when she was 18, she took her teacher's examination under Charlie McIntosh, and passed it, and started and taught. And then the next summer, she started to what was then Illinois State Normal and went in the summer times. She she had the money to also take with her her sister Belle, who was Belle Delvaux Timmons of this community.
Do you know which school your mother taught in?
Yes, Mother taught. Well, she finished out a term at what we know as Slebtown, but the real name of it is Union. She also taught at Piatt. She was 2 years there, and she roomed with the Hanselman family when she was there. And I know, I recall that she said she lost her watch, and when the snows left, she found it where she had to crawl through the fence. Now, she had to walk footlog to get across the creek there. And she had most of the Dupson children when she taught there. Then she taught 2 years at Camp Creek. You see, in those days, you usually stayed 2 years in a place. Then you went somewhere else. Now, when she was in Camp Creek, she had Vernon Nichols, who became the Illinois State Superintendent of Schools. And he always said she was the best disciplinarian he ever had, and I didn't doubt him at all. Then she taught at Ridge School for 2 years, and when she taught there, she stayed with the Pat Dressback family. Paid $1 a day for room and board, and now she bought the buggy, and my uncle had a horse, and he would come and get her at the on Fridays and take her back. Oh yes, she taught at Moraine School too. She taught 2 years there, and there I know she had the Welch children. Oh, I don't know who all she had, but one of them is Dolly Huffman. Is still living of that group.
Mm-hmm. So she had quite a wide experience.
Yes, she did have. Mm-hmm.
Do you know what the ancestral origin of your last name is?
As far as Lilly is English,
Mm-hmm.
but we're so mixed up that we'd have no idea what it was.
When did your family come to the United States? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea. They were here before the Revolution, both sides.
Where did they settle first?
The Lillys were down toward Virginia somewhere. At least they came from Virginia into Kentucky with Daniel Boone. And now the Evans also came from Kentucky to settle there in Kentucky, and then came here. Now, as for the Biesecker, my grandfather Biesecker was a Pennsylvania Dutch, and they settled at Allentown, Pennsylvania. But when he was 7, they moved by covered wagon to the Tippecanoe Valley of Indiana, speaking only German. And there were just 2 families of them that spoke German, and sent him to school, and they could speak German, and no one else could. And then he came on out here after the Civil War. He was in the Civil War. The Harper side, I don't know what they came over with, but they've been here as far as I know. But they were in Ohio, and that is, to come to Illinois, they came from Ohio. But before that, I don't know. I don't know.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 2 brothers.
Did you all have responsibilities on the farm?
Oh my, yes, that was expected. When we got home, my job was to fill the boiler, if you know what a boiler is, a wash boiler with cobs. That was mine, and to fill the reservoir on the stove, and that, of course, required that I go pump it out of the cistern and bring it in and fill that. I was always small, so I learned to wash dishes by standing on a box. And that was, my mother usually washed the dishes and I dried them, but if I had to wash the dishes, my younger brother dried them. I learned to iron with little, what you would call toy irons. I did all of the dishcloths and things like that on a chair, the bottom of an old chair. But we had our work to do. And as I grew older, of course, I helped with the washing and things like that. And the boys, of course, they had to help with the milking and all of the chores that are required on a farm. And as soon as we were able to, as soon as they were large enough to get on a cultivator or something like that, they went to the field. Now, I helped a few times cultivate corn, but my mother always said, well, there's only one daughter, and she needed help at the house.
I would think she did with all
Yes,
their men.
with all those hired men.
Yeah.
I remember, how I despised having to help with the washing with all the hired men's clothes. And their underwear had to be ironed.
Oh.
Everything had to be ironed, you know. It was all cotton. And I would purposely scorch them.
What kind of games did you play with your brothers? Did you have anything special you recall?
Well, we had, my younger brother and I played together a lot. My older brother was always too old for us. We had a place down on the old mill race, which very few people here in Pike County know anything about. It was just about half a quarter across the pasture. And a Frenchman had come here when the place was early settled and thought he would dig what he called a bayou or a mill race from one where the river curved from one side. So the river would curve and then he would dig across and then he would get the water to run through that. Mm-hmm. And then he would get the mill to go. Well, after he got it dug about half a mile, he found there wasn't enough slope to do it. But we would play at that old mill race, mm-hmm. and right across the way was Jim Lodge's old bull. He always had a Jersey bull there, and we were scared to death of that. But we would tempt it a little bit. We had our swings. I can't remember that I played, games and things like that. I remember my brother had his toys and sandbox that he always played with and things like that.
Did the Frenchman ever build a mill, or did you just
No, it didn't have enough slope.
You just started digging and
mm-hmm.
found out.
It's still, the trench is still there. You can still see it as far as that's concerned. But he didn't, there was not enough slope to do it. And that was always fun in the summertime to go there. We had our own pony and a pony cart. And we lived 2 miles from school, so we used that cart to go to and from school. We did go down. I went to Stringtown School. We did have, in the wintertime, we had the hill, and the neighbor boys would come, and we would spend a whole afternoon. Every time it snowed, we were up and down that hill all the time. That was one of our fun things, mm-hmm. in the winter. But now, as for games, we had such games in the wintertime as Lotto, where we learned all the names of the states and the capitals, and checkers. And we were allowed to play rook, but we were not allowed to have playing cards in our house.
Why was rook different, do you think?
Playing cards were used for gambling,
mm-hmm.
and rook would not be used for gambling. Mm-hmm. See, did we have any other games? I know this, we always had to go to bed at 8 o'clock regardless. We had our books. We were readers. And my mother read to us, she would read a chapter an evening in the wintertime. I know she read Mrs. Weeks and the Cabbage Patch. She read The Swiss Family and Robinson, and she read Robinson Crusoe. Now, those are three that I do remember that she read to us.
Mm-hmm. You said you took your horse and buggy to school. Mm-hmm. What kind of lunches did you take every day?
We've been trying to remember what we had, and my cousin and I were talking about this, and we said, we know we didn't have peanut butter, but we had sandwiches, and sometimes my mother would get one of these little jars of dried beef, and you'd get one layer of dried beef. One jar would last 3 of us a whole week. We had homemade cookies. Mm-hmm. We always had apples. And probably a jar of canned fruit. But I suppose our sandwiches were jelly and apple butter and things like that, or maybe a slice of meat, mm-hmm. something.
What was your school day like?
Well, school took up at 9 o'clock. But you were expected to be there. I mean, you weren't exactly expected to be there, but you went to be there at 8 o'clock so you could play if you could. But we didn't get to leave our house until 8 o'clock. My mother, having been a teacher, she wasn't going to put that on the teacher. And then at 9 o'clock, all the kids had to have their pencils sharpened, and there was no pencil sharpener. Oh. So we had a man teacher, Noble Ranch. And he would take us back around the coal buckets, and so I know the first 15 minutes was spent with people sharpening pencils.
With your pocket knife? Or?
Well, with his pocket knife and the boys who had pocket knives getting our pencils sharpened. I'm afraid much time was wasted there. And then we had 6 grades. Now, I'm not sure they were 6 grades. You had a first grade and a second grade class. Then they alternated 3rd and 4th, 5th and 6th, 7th and 8th. Now, if you had gone through the first grade and the second grade, and it was the year not to have a 3rd grade, then you took the 4th grade, with the exception of math. That went right straight through. Then you came back and took the 3rd grade, and then you went from the 3rd grade to the 6th grade and back to the 5th grade. You see how you alternated. Yeah. Well, most youngsters couldn't do that, and so sometimes they just would straighten them out by holding them back for it. With the classes they had, we had a recitation bench, which was an old bench about 10 foot long, and the teacher would call you up, and, well, for instance, they'd say first grade reading, and you'd go up for 5 minutes maybe, and then you'd go back to your seat. There were no workbooks. I guess we sat there. I don't know what else we could have done. And then the next grade would go up. We did use the chalkboard for math. I remember them using that. But I'm afraid we just sat there and listened to what the others were saying, and there wasn't very much that you could do.
And I don't suppose you had too many textbooks either.
Oh, we had a textbook for everything. And it was a very, very structured program in that Mr. McIntosh sat out at the end of, well, when I first went to school, they had, every month, examination questions were sent to you, to the teacher, and they were not to be open until the day of the examination. And on that day, then the teacher would have students had to sign a place. There would be, I think there was a place for 3, that the questions had not been opened until that time. And then on examination day, you sat there and wrote all day on those questions. Now, eventually, that was every 2 months, I think. When I started teaching country school, it was every 2 months. And you gave the questions orally to the 1st and 2nd grade. And then you had to grade those papers, and that your grade for the term, or for that particular term, depended on what you made on that exam. Your daily grades had nothing to do with it. And those papers were kept, where when Mr. McIntosh came, he could look at them if he wanted to. And I can tell you this, with Mr. McIntosh, we, as teachers, were very closely supervised. But he also sent out a book that told that at the end of the first month, you were to have completed to a certain page. It was just divided in 8 parts. We had 8-month school. Now, when my mother started teaching, she had a 7-month school. But we had an 8-month. And then when I was teaching, it was first an 8-month, and then I got them to let me have a 9-month school, which was a very rare thing in the rural schools. Let me tell you a little about my mother's school. When she went to school, you see, it was in quarters then. There was the fall quarter, the winter quarter, and the spring quarter. And in the fall quarter, just the ones who were not able to work, too little to work, or not unable to work, or if they had plenty of help at home, went to school. And then in the winter, all of them came, and the teacher often had them older than she. That was when the harvest were in, the young men would come in, and so forth. Now then, if this person came in and was reading at 3rd grade level, he read with the little fellow down here who was also reading at 3rd grade level. You might have in a class age range of 15 years almost. And that was the way it went. Her teacher there she went to Union School, which at that time was known as Slebtown. One teacher walked all the way from Lodge every day and back. And I remember Mother saying she had a red serge wool dress She wore it every day, but she had a white apron on, clean white apron every day. That when I went into that school and saw how little it was and knew that they had 60 at a time in it. She told, when she first went, she was very bashful, and her sister was 6 years older than she, so the teacher put her between her sister and another girl, and there she was with her feet dangling all day long at a larger seat. So,
that would be hard for the men to ever get through with that kind of arrangement.
And then you see on the spring term, they went back to work. So, and they used, they had nothing to play with except a handmade ball or a handmade ball bat. And they used to go down in the woods there and had the grapevines for their swings and so on, and played that way. But now back to when I went to school, as you ask about the games in the home, the games in the school, we played Black Man, I don't know what they call it now, which was a running game. We played what we called Stealing Sticks, which was let's see, where are you from? New York. What's your trade? And then they would tell what it was, and or they wouldn't tell what it was, and they'd say, show your tricks. And then you had to pantomime what your trade was, and then they would come and get you. Another one we had was Stealing Sticks, where we had a pile of sticks, and we'd try, and guards, and try to run through and get those. We had Andy Over. But when we had this man teacher, it was ball games mostly with him. And so the younger ones, or the people who didn't like ball, had to more or less make their own games.
How long of periods would you be given?
Well, school took up at 9 o'clock. It would go till 12 o'clock. And then in the wintertime, usually we had a half hour at noon because we wanted to get out early, and we get out at 3:30. However, they would soon, by this time of year in March, they would change it to full hour noon, and then you got out at 4 o'clock. But when you got out at 4 o'clock as teachers, and if you were in the 7th or the 8th grade, you stayed until almost 5 o'clock to review, because there was a what they called a final examination that Mr. McIntosh gave. You came in here to the usually the Washington School or to the high school after that was built, and wrote your final examination. And Mr. McIntosh and certain teachers graded that and decided whether you passed on or not.
And that was 7th and 8th graders?
That was 7th and 8th graders. And a teacher didn't get away, and the youngsters, 7th or 8th graders, did not get away until 5 o'clock at night.
So that made it a long day.
It was a rather long day. And the teacher did her own janitor work, all of it. She built the fires. I remember going into those buildings on Monday mornings when the furnace had gone out, and the boards would just squeak, they were so cold. And starting the fire. We had coal house and a cob house, and they weren't always close to the school. And we had to bring our coal in, carried our own coal, or carried our own cobs, until I finally got smart enough to hire Junior Green Arch to do mine for 50 cents a week. He carried it for me all the time. And then you had to take care of that fire all day long. So it was not easy. And then after the youngsters left, you swept the floor and cleaned it. And it was muddy, I can assure you that.
I'm sure it was.
We all, when I was growing up there in the school, not when I taught, I wouldn't do this, but the teacher bought 3 shiny tin cups. Well, of course, the school bought them, but he brought them to school in the fall, and that is what we drank from the whole year. And towards the end of the year, they were rather battered, And if one of us had the measles, we all had them.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
We did. And we had to get a drink, you had to go out to the pump and get it. And of course the restrooms were down in the corner of the schoolyard. So, regardless of what the weather was.
So things have changed quite a bit in this.
Things have changed a great deal.
Well, after you finished going through 8th grade, then did you come into Monticello?
I came to Monticello my mother, having been a teacher, was very dissatisfied with the education that I was getting out there, and so she sent me to my parents came in and talked with Mr. McIntyre. She said send her to Washington School. And I did my 7th and 8th grade at Washington School. And the tuition there was $6 a month. And it was a struggle for my parents to pay that, but they paid it. And then when my younger brother came along to the 7th and 8th grade, he was sent to Washington School. If it hadn't been, I suppose I would have never even gotten through high school, because those who did not do that, those who stayed there in the country at that particular school, failed the first year of high school. They just failed out. They just couldn't make it.
How did you come into Monticello?
Well, I had an older brother going to high school, and he could drive the car. You didn't have to take driver's license or anything, so I came in with him. When the river flooded, which it would sometimes, my dad would take us down to the railroad track and walk across the bridge with us, and then we walked on in. So we were only about 2.5 miles out.
So then you went on to high school here.
I went to high school here, yes.
How many teachers were there in the high school at that point?
I think we had about 15 at that time. Some came in. We had several new teachers right at that time. Mr. Sutton was the principal, and Mr. Sutton did not believe in teachers' colleges, and he brought his from the universities. And I know 3 of the teachers that I had as freshman, sophomore, were outstanding teachers, and they went to universities to teach. So he did have a nice group. Now, one of my teachers was J.K. Phelps. He came here as a young man. I was here.
After you finished high school, what did you decide to do?
I went to Illinois State, what at that time was called, Illinois State Normal. I went there for 2 years, and after 2 years, one could go out and teach in the elementary school, or if you'd taken commerce, you could teach in the high school after 2 years. But I took the elementary program, or you could take the high school program too, and they would let you go out and teach in elementary school. So they just didn't realize that you have to be trained for elementary. But I've always felt very fortunate that I went into the elementary training, because I don't think I could have gotten along very well with high school training, and really been very successful as an elementary teacher. So then I started teaching here in this county, and I taught at Madden.
Now, where was Madden?
Madden was between Lodge and Galesville. I had 6 pupils the first year. That was all. Then I taught Wildcat, which is down towards Allerton, and I taught at Anderson, which is out here. And then I went to my home school. This is what you're not supposed to do, but I did. I went to Stringtown. I think maybe some of my happiest years were teaching there.
How long did you teach there?
I think I taught 5 years there. Something like that. 5 of the 10. Yes, I'm sure I was there 5 years. And I had some very, very good students there. I had as high as 25 students at a time. I had, these names may be very familiar to people years to come. I had all of the Green Arch children. I had the younger Oldfield children. I had John Roberts' children. I had the Rollin Huffman children. And I had the Everett Welch children. And then there were others too.
Did you live at home?
I lived at home. I was only 2 miles from home, and when the weather was good, I walked it. Otherwise, I had my own car by that time. So.
When you went to college, did you pay for your own education, or did your parents help you?
When we were youngsters, my brothers each were given a pig to raise and sell, and that money was theirs. My mother gave me an old hen that we set, and I raised the chickens. And now we did not use that money for anything other than to put it in the bank. And we put it in the bank here at the Old National Bank. They at that time gave children a bank. It was a silver bank. It had a key to it, and you could not get your money out. You had to take it in to them, and they used the key. The bank still belonged to them. I wish I had one of those now. I had that money that I saved from raising chickens. To this day, I dislike chickens. And then my parents helped me. But my first year of college, I kept the record.
$dollars to go to
That
college.
was my what it cost me for the first.
And did that include living up there?
Oh yes, I lived there.
Was that your first experience living on your own?
Yes, it was. And I remember they took me up there and left me for 6 weeks before I got to come home. And then one of the girls who was there from Monticello, Ann Summers, mother was a teacher, and her mother, of course, had a little bit of money, and she bought Ann an old, I don't know whether, I think it was Ford or something, with a rumble seat, a little old roadster with a rumble seat. And so Ann would charge us $1 a weekend to come home. And regardless of the weather, we came home and with a blanket over our head usually. They were the Royce girls also came home at that time. And I took back enough food with me, usually to last me until Wednesday. And that's the way I went through. My clothes were mostly clothes that were made over. You see, I was in the Depression. And, well, I remember in grade school, my clothes were, my mother cut up her wedding dress. And then I had, my grandfather's cousin died, and I had her clothes made over for me. Those elderly ladies' clothes, you know how attractive those would be, but my mother was good at sewing, and so that's where I got them.
To go back just a little, did World War I affect you at all? You were fairly young.
All I knew about World War I, all I can remember about World War I, really, is we youngsters were walking home from school, and at that time they were building the house over, and we came up on the hill, and they had the flag clear on the top. They're up on top of the chimney. And it was the end of the war. The other thing that I remember about it was I had a doll that was a Johnny doll, dressed as a World War I soldier. And that's all I can remember about it.
How about the Depression? You were in college during the Depression?
Well, I was in high school and college. You see, I went to college in 1931. So I was really right into it at that time. But we survived. I well remember my mother giving a neighbor the last quarter we had for flowers to buy at the death of a neighbor. And also, when I came home from college, and had to have some tuition money or something, I would see my dad haul off some corn to get me enough money to go back. And there was one other little thing that we had money. See, the banks closed, right? They closed while I was in college.
Did you have any money in the banks when it closed?
My mother had some money in the bank that she put in before she was married, and evidently just forgot about it. And one of the bankers here in Monticello saw my dad and asked him if he knew that money was there. And they got it out in time. Then we did have some other money coming in. My grandfather he just divided money up between his youngsters. And my mother used part of that money for me to go to college on.
Did your brothers go to college?
My younger brother did, and I helped him. The first year when I was first year I was teaching, he went to college, and I recall at the end of the time I had $40 for the summer, and that's the only summer. No, there was one other summer. The summer after my father died, I wasn't in school or working, but that summer I wasn't able to go to school. See, I went 2 years, then I went ahead and got every summer.
After you taught 10 years and then you went back to school?
No, I went in the summer times.
Oh, in the summer times.
Yes.
Where did you go back to Normal?
I went to Normal, and then I went over to Eastern. Always checked back with the registrar to see whether I could or not. And then one summer I went to Western. And one summer I went to the University of Illinois. Then I gathered everything together, went back up there and graduated. Then I went to the University of Illinois after that for my master's and my advanced degree.
And you did all this in the summers?
Yes. Now I did go to, I went to Boulder one summer and then transferred that back to the University of Illinois by writing a comprehensive examination. The University of Illinois does not accept graduate credits, easily. So I did that.
While you were doing this, were you still teaching in the country schools?
Well, I taught in the country school for 10 years, and then I taught, I was here in Monticello for 10 years. And when I came to Monticello, I did not have my degree. I lacked just about, I think I lacked about 8 hours of having my degree. And I thought everyone had a degree here in Monticello. And I was so surprised to find that I was nearer the degree than, I would say, 50% of them. And I finished and got it, of course, right after the first year that I was here. And was one of the few. Well, Dwight Wilkie had his degree in elementary education, and I had mine in elementary education. The rest of them had more or less in high school backgrounds.
Did you teach in Washington School?
No, I taught in Lincoln School.
What grade?
I came as a 5th grade teacher with the understanding that if there were an offering or opening at a lower grade, that I would get it, and by November I was in the 2nd grade. So I did most of my teaching in the 2nd grade there in Lincoln. However, after coaxing, Wilkie finally let me do the cycle where I taught the same group through the 1st grade, 2nd grade, and 3rd grade. By the time I had them in the 3rd grade, they really didn't need me because they knew what they were supposed to do.
Was that common to have one teacher following along at that point?
No, it was not. It was more or less used in lab schools and so forth. Then I had another group that I took from 1st grade to 2nd grade because I didn't feel I had that much to offer 3 years. And they did that here in Monticello until just in the last 2 or 3 years. But it took a lot of talking for me to get them to let me do it. But it's a wonderful way to do it because you get to know the youngsters so well that even over the break of the summer, you pick up right where you left off. And I think any of the youngsters that I had would certainly tell you that that worked out so much better for them.
Was Mr. Wilkie principal at Lincoln?
Mr. Wilkie was principal at Lincoln all the time that I was. Yes, all the time that I was there.
Do you recall any of the other teachers that were there when you started?
Oh yes, Iola Haynes was there, and I remember at the first meeting I went to, sitting by her, and she said, "I've been here 15 years," and I kind of said to myself, "I'm not going to see me around here 15 years." Edna Mary. She was Edna McMillan. She had taught with my mother and gone to college with my mother. Let's see. Oh, Lynn Mitchell. Ruth Short. Ruth was an excellent first grade teacher. Dorothy Buckingham. Oh, May Downs, who was a superior teacher. And then there was Bernadine Hudson, who did not stay very long, and there was a Mitchell, who did not stay very long. Pat Shepard was art teacher there. Frank Mueller came in as art teacher there. Vera Wolf was the music teacher. And then Dorcas Heron came as a music teacher. Just before I left, Dorcas came in. Marjorie Beckhart was a teacher. Rosie Smith.
Now, how long did you stay at Lincoln School?
10 years.
10.
Really, 10 and a half.
And then where did you go?
I went to the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee and taught in the education department there.
That was quite a switch.
Well, I had, for 2 summers prior to that, I had taught at the Oregon College of Education at Monmouth, Oregon. So I'd had a little taste of it. But it was quite a switch to go 1 week with second graders and the next week in with these college students.
Mm-hmm. How long did you stay there?
I stayed there 2 years, and then I went to the Illinois State University.
And taught there?
Yes, and I taught there. Spent the rest of my time there until I came home, and then I've been doing summers with the federal program with Title I with Mr. Nolte.
How has the school system changed since when you started teaching at Lincoln? What are some of the biggest things you noticed?
You mean when I went back to substitute a few times?
When you were originally started at Lincoln.
And as it is now, well, I substituted for a while when I came back, so I think maybe I can tell you a little bit about that. We took care of all of the children. We had a home room, and those children did not go here, there, and yonder for anything. They were our full responsibility. Now then, they have a spatial teacher for this and a spatial teacher for that. They siphon off the ones who are learning disabilities. We took care of them. We hadn't even heard of the word learning disability for that matter. Regardless of how slow the child was, we had him. Regardless of how intelligent he was, we had him. It was a homeroom situation. We kept the library in our own rooms. There was not a central library. The music teachers came to the room. The art teacher came to the room. Now in the upper grades, it was departmentalized a little, so that you might have math with Mrs. Haynes, and then the youngsters would move for reading with Mrs. Mary, or spelling with Mr. Wilkie. They moved one room to another. Now let me see. They still do that there. I've done some substitute work in the upper grades, and they still do that to some extent. But I think the greatest difference is the fact that the teacher was responsible for her room and the youngsters in that room. I feel that our PTA was perhaps much stronger than it is now, especially at Lincoln School. We had one of the strongest ones there was, and we could call on homeroom mothers and so on.
Would you rather see the teachers handling the gifted children plus the learning disability? Do you think that makes it a better or a worse situation?
Well, I don't know. There were times when I felt when I had them, well, now if they would just, if we could just siphon off a few, then I could do with what's in the middle. But I don't know. I like to work with the whole group myself. Now, sometimes you did get a child who was mentally handicapped, and it made it very difficult to give that child what he really needed. But in the end, I think he probably learned just as much as with the special teacher. It depended upon the teacher who was teaching him. Now, I recall one teacher who took this one child who was handicapped, mentally handicapped, and she said, I just took my number of minutes I had in the day, I divided by the number of youngsters I had, I came out with 20 minutes or something like that, and that is what I set aside for that youngster. Mm-hmm. Then I could give my time for the rest of them. But they progressed along all right, and many of them, as we look back, they have done perfectly all right. They did not have the stigma of being in a learning disability or in a mentally handicapped. That was not there. Mm-hmm. Oh, I want to tell you something else about the early schools too, and that is the 4-H. If we took 4-H when we were in the 7th and 8th grades, we did not have to take agriculture. That course. Didn't have to write an examination on it. So, practically every rural youngster took 4-H. If he didn't, the teacher would see to it that he did take it, so she didn't have to teach agriculture. And that is why, to this day, Piatt County has one of the strongest 4-H groups. It just was instilled.
It was part of the school program.
But we did not have, now it was an individual thing. My mother helped me. We didn't go in groups, mm-hmm. but we had to, certain projects, and then we had to exhibit those projects.
And did you have to go to the 4-H fairs and with your projects? And
yes, I remember I had to take a darning that I had done, and I'm sure no one would ever darn stockings now, but that was one of them. And another, I made a dress, and my mother always thought I was going to grow into, I don't know what, but she would always get it much larger, for I might grow. And it was a size 32 dress. I'll never forget that, and I still haven't grown into it.
There's not much chance now.
No.
Do they have a fair every summer out at the campground or the fairgrounds?
I can't remember when they had the fairs. I did go a few times to races that they had there, and they had Chautauquas. But I didn't really. I wasn't old enough to go to those, mm-hmm. and then the fair died out, and then it started in the late 30s. And I worked during the summer with Jim Corbett, who was the manager of the fair. My dad was on the board. And I worked in the office then for those fairs. So I was very much involved and knew what was going on there at the fairs until they went broke. They went broke really on the large bands that they brought in here.
To play it? To
play. They had the dances in the pavilion. Mm-hmm. And they brought the name bands in. Mm. And if it rained, why, it was too bad, really. Mm-hmm. And then, too, I knew another side of it. After I went into the Monticello schools, we always had a PTA stand there. And that was the way we made PTA money and bought many of the extra things for the schools. Mm-hmm. And Elma Bruin usually headed up that cooking and everything.
So when did those die out then?
They must have died out, I would say, well, when could those have died out? I would say around the 50s somewhere.
Mm-hmm. They continued quite a while.
Pardon?
They have continued quite a while.
They continued quite a while, yes. Mm-hmm. Because I was teaching in Monticello at the time when they stopped. So because I was working in the PTA tent for a while.
Did you tell me before that you had been in the service also?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What were you in?
I was in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
I was a WAC, W-A-C, not the auxiliary. And I was with the Signal Corps and ended up in the Pentagon.
Oh. When were you in the service?
Towards the end of the war, let me see, I was in there for a year. I got the last year of the war. I was a cryptographer.
Which does what?
Breaks code.
That would be
It was
an
in the code room.
interesting job.
It was a very interesting job.
How did you happen to get into that?
Well, I felt that well, let's say at that time, and we were all very conscious of our country,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt that I had a duty, and there were other people who could teach,
Mm-hmm.
who were left here who could teach.
So you went in, and where were you stationed before you ended up in the Pentagon?
Fort Oglethorpe, and don't tell me I forgot it. Down by Joplin, Missouri. Oh, what was that fort? Didn't you think I would remember it? Well, anyway, it was in Missouri.
How did you get into working with codes, breaking codes?
Well, there again, they give you all types of examinations, and it was that. And the other thing that I could have gone into the financial part of it if I had chosen, but my highest score was in mechanics, believe it or not. They couldn't believe it, and I couldn't either. They said one of the highest scores they had. And code work is somewhat would be along that line.
Mm-hmm. What, do you recall any of the codes that you broke? Were they Germans or?
Well, we didn't break their codes. We broke the codes that, you see, our government, we had our own codes, you see, and that's what we broke.
You were?
We were, General MacArthur's would come in, and each day it was changed. So that the Japanese or Germans were never ever able to break the United States code method. And it would come in, and then we had a little ball that we put in, and sat there and typed it out with the codes. I think I remember more of MacArthur's because they happened to be coming in at the time at the shift I was working there. Of course, they were getting them from everyone as far as that was concerned. There were some of them when there were, my one friend worked in, it was a hand type that we had to learn how to do it. And that was from those that were way off somewhere where they could not use the code machines. They weren't in headquarters anywhere at all. So
that would have been interesting work.
It was interesting work. I'll never forget it. Over one door was a sign, "Through these portals walk the dumbest people in the world." And they meant you stay dumb. You do not tell anything.
Mm-hmm. So you were there at the end of the war then?
Yes.
And then you got out of the service?
Yes, and I did I went to Kankakee for a little, or just to, finished out a term for a teacher. I don't know why. She died, I guess, in a departmental school there. And being the youngest teacher in the group, I was assigned the physical education, and I had classes of about 100 girls, and I stood on the stage and taught those classes. Then I had a chance to come back here and get out of that, and I certainly took it.
Did you come? How long did you teach here when you came back then?
I taught in Monticello just 10.5 years.
Mm-hmm. What other organizations and churches have you belonged to in Monticello?
Well, I've always been in the Methodist Church in Monticello. Oh, organizations. Really, when I was teaching, I didn't belong to organizations very well, except the church work, because when you teach full-time, you do not belong to them. I do remember that I used to, when the war was going on, in the beginning, we went to the Red Cross and rolled bandages or whatever we might need with Agatha Haggerty. Then after I returned here, of course I'm in Home Extension, the Women's Club, and the Garden Club, and the now I was in the hospital auxiliary before I left, the old hospital auxiliary, and then it died down, and then they have the new one. But that's more or less what I've been into. And of course, PTA was one of the big organizations that we had here and had to attend, and I attended the state conferences on those. But I didn't have time to do those things.
Mm-hmm. What was the first car you recall?
You mean mine or my dad's?
Either one.
My dad had, it was an old Buick. No, it wasn't. It was a Lexington. It was a Lexington. And I know we'd take trips every year. We had a tent that went up over that, and a board like that made the bed for my folks that was on the running board that they could let down, and we could pack our things in. And then we 3 kids went. One slept in the back seat, and there was this foot railing in here, and one on one side of the foot railing and one on the other side of the foot railing. And we'd take, of course, you know, if you went as far as Missouri, that was a long, long ways, and you always had flat tires and so forth. We camped in the schoolyards as a rule, and the people would always come to see what we were doing, and we had nice visits with other people and so forth. That's the one that I remember. Then he had an old Overland, and I remember he had vases in it that you put flowers in if you wanted to. My first car was a Pontiac. It was a second-hand Pontiac that I bought myself.
Did very many people take their family and travel?
No, it was very unusual for anyone to, but my folks just liked to do that, and we cooked out. There were no such things as motels. There were hotels, but we wouldn't think of going to those.
Mm-hmm. So you just camped in the schoolyards?
And we camped in schoolyards because you had your water, and the outdoor toilets were there. Mm-hmm. You didn't need any more than that.
Mm-hmm. That would be interesting.
It was. We really enjoyed that very much.
I can picture the car with the tent over it.
Well, they put the tent up at night, you see, up and over it. Mm-hmm.
What president do you recall most vividly?
Well, I remember when Warren Harding died, and we got the newspaper, and they left the comic section out, and I was so disgusted. That I remember. That's about all I do remember about him. Of course, the first president that I voted for was Roosevelt. I wasn't too pleased about that in his later years. And my grandmother said I should have been disinherited from the family because the family was Republican. So. But really, as to remember a president and what he did, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I thank you very much for sharing your time with us.
I don't know whether I've given you very much at all or not, but